my soul encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. Thomas Moore, in his book, Writing in the Sand, says this: Transfiguration is a natural achievement within the scope of any man or woman. It is entirely different from personal power or happiness or success. These things thrill the ego, while transfiguration sidesteps the ego altogether. It satisfies at a deep level in the soul, but in it there is no preoccupation with personal satisfactions. You don't live life as much as life is lived through you. You have the composure and sense of meaning that this other kind of life offers, but you aren't seeking any affirmation that you were all right or in any way better than others. At Bible study this week, the question was asked, what is the difference between transfiguration and transformation? Another word that's big in the spiritual realm. It is a very important question, and as I continue to ponder, which I've continued to ponder over the last few days, and I have come to a somewhat different answer than I offered at study, which is not unusual because I'm constantly transforming. And the answer is somewhat different, mostly because I see now several layers in transformation and transfiguration. Transformation, I believe, is a first step. We become aware of something that we hadn't seen before, or that we now see differently, which brings about metanoia, a change of heart and mind. But the awareness alone doesn't bring about transformation. Rather, we need to choose to be transformed by what we now know, which will cause us to think and feel and live differently. For me, fair trade coffee is one of those examples. Another one, which I haven't talked about, is cut flowers that we buy in stores, that I no longer buy in stores. Because what I discovered was that most of the flowers that are cut and available in stores come from greenhouses in Central America. And all of the water gets diverted to grow these flowers, and we end up with villages that have no water. When I learned that, I could no longer buy those flowers, which I love to have on my table through the winter when I couldn't grow my own. But I don't do it anymore. And the transformation wasn't just the awareness, it was changing how I live as a result of what I know. Transfiguration, I believe, is the second step. Once transformed, we experience a deeper change at the level of the soul. As Thomas Moore says, we don't live life as much as life is lived through us. Transfiguration happens when we move beyond our ego-driven life to a deeper soul-driven life. It is at this deeper level that others see a glow, an aura perhaps, just as people saw in Moses and the disciples saw in Jesus. And I don't believe that transformation or transfiguration happens only once in our lifetime. Instead, I believe it continues to unfold the more we open to the God presence in our lives. Transfiguration becomes the visible proof of an individual or a community's transformation. We witness a radiance that tells us There is something profound going on here. I want to say more about radiance, but let's first look at the story of Jesus' transfiguration. This story has its beginning in 2 Peter, one of the letters which predates the Gospels. And then the story appears in all three synoptic Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, with slight variations, of course, because we've come to expect that. Nearly all biblical scholars now agree that this story is metaphorical narrative and not memory. But whether it happened is not decisive to its meaning. What we know for sure is that people who encountered Jesus experienced a spiritual presence in him. Rudolf Otto, a German Lutheran theologian who lived from mid-19th to mid-20th century, speaks of a numinous presence. Numinous presence. Sort of like luminous, but somewhat different. And he says that there is a sense of otherness in them that evokes awe, amazement, or astonishment. There may be something authoritative about the way they speak, penetrating about the way they see, or powerful about their presence. I believe it was this numinous presence in Jesus that created this wonderful story, as a way to say in words what people saw in him, that glow. Jesus was radiant. They were saying that Jesus was different, like Moses and Elijah were different. Only Jesus was bigger and better than Moses and Elijah. Moses' face shone, but Jesus was dazzling from head to toe. Moses came down the mountain with tablets, but Jesus became engulfed in a cloud of God. No tablets required. Moses was the esteemed lawgiver, and Elijah was the esteemed prophet out of the Jewish people's history. But Jesus became the new leader with a new law of love and compassion and a new prophecy that the kingdom is right here. This is what the story of Transfiguration is telling us. There is a new way, a new path that we are called to, the way of God that will transform and transfigure each of us just as Jesus was. And Jesus not only calls us, but challenges us to become numinous presences, just as he was. To experience a life of abundance that is rooted in our soul rather than our ego. We are called to spiritual transformation, to a life of blessing that transcends the mundane and often mind-numbing ordinary life and fills our heart and soul in extraordinary ways. But this is way more than a challenge of individual transformation, because we are also being called to be a community of transformation. Church communities are in big, big trouble. And that may be harder for us to understand here because we are fairly healthy at the moment. But take a look around this room and ask how many of us will be here 20 years from now. And of those that will be here, how many will be able to take an active role? We have lost our dazzle, my friends, in the outside world. For the younger generations, we are perceived at having no value at best, or actually being a danger or a nuisance at worst. And even though more than 80% of Canadians still say they believe in God, less than 20% of Canadians are involved in a faith community. The church is no longer perceived as being able or interested in nurturing people's spiritual lives. That is the perception. We have become a remnant few who continue to believe a faith community has value. But I also believe that we have something to offer, something that many non-church folks are yearning for. The problem is that we aren't dazzling enough. And I'm not suggesting neon lights and a rock band. It's not that kind of dazzle. Rather, I believe that we need to take seriously the need for ongoing, soul deep transformation in this community. God is calling us to metanoia, to a change of heart and mind, as we find the path that will make this a community of value to those of us that gather now, and for the many more who simply drive by. What we need to experience in one another, and what the wider community needs to experience in us, is transfiguration. To see a glow, a numinous presence that compels others to say, there is something of God going on in there, and I want to be part of it. Jim Taylor, in his column this week in the Calendar, wrote about an ascent movement that may seem to be unimportant or of little value or easily squashed by the powers that be until it reaches that critical mass. We are, I believe, an ascent movement as a faith community in Lake Country. We may think that we are too small to have any impact in the district, let alone the world. But I remind you, as Jim also said in his article, it was a Jewish peasant in a remote village that gathered a handful of friends together that changed the world. I have high hopes for us as people of God because I believe there is purpose in what we do and value in being part of this community. My dream is for the kind of living transformation to happen here that transfigures each of us and all of us to be a radiant community for all the world to see.